Good morning, everyone. Today our lesson is going to be called Love That Intercedes, and it's the story of Jonathan's attempt to protect David. And we're going to find out, is he successful or not? We're going to talk a little bit about intercession for others. It comes from 1 Samuel 19, 1 through 7, and it's divided into 3 sections. The plot, the intercession, and then the aftermath. So we're going to start with 1 Samuel 19, verses 1 through 3. Saul called his son Jonathan together with his servants and ordered them to kill David. But because Jonathan treasured David, he went and warned him, "My father is looking for a way to kill you. Here's what you need to do. Tomorrow morning, hide and stay hidden. I'll go out with my father into the field where you're hiding. I'll talk about you with my father, and we'll see what he says. Then I'll report back to you." This story is continuing from 1 Samuel 18, where Saul is in a jealous rage. Saul had tried to kill David by his own hand. Now in chapter 19, this is a new attempt in which he himself is not going to kill David, but he wants his son Jonathan and his royal court to kill David. The problem is now Jonathan has developed a deep friendship with David, and he is struggling with the alliance to his father, the king. In order to save his friend's life, Jonathan will have to disobey his father, and the king could certainly punish his son in any way he chooses for such an act of rebellion. Jonathan chooses his love for his friend David over his devotion and loyalty to his father. Jonathan tells David of his father's intentions, and Jonathan decides to discuss David with his father to try to convince his father Saul that David should not be murdered. Jonathan is going to try to convince Saul to abandon the plans he originally had to kill him. Now I want to go back and just touch a little bit on 1 Samuel 18 because that kind of gives us the background. I'm going to read just a few verses. First of all, in the beginning, Saul had received David into his own household. He accepted him as one of his own. Saul gave David, he would tell him what to do, and David would do it. And David did it very well, much better than anyone else had done under his direction. As they returned home one night, after David had killed the Philistine, the women poured out of the villages of Israel singing and dancing. And this is verses 6 through 9. They were welcoming King Saul with tambourines, festive songs, and lutes in playful frolic. The women sang, "Saul kills by the 1,000, David by the 10,000. This made Saul very angry. He took it as a personal insult because they were crediting David with more kills than Saul, and Saul got jealous over it. Verses 10 and 11, the next day an ugly mood was sent by God to afflict Saul, who became quite beside himself and began to rave. David played his harp as usual, but Saul had a spear in his hand. Suddenly Saul threw the spear, thinking, "I will nail David to the wall." David ducked, and the spear missed. Now Saul feared David, and it was clear to him that God was with David. In verses 28-29, as Saul more and more realized that God was with David and how much of his own daughter Michal loved him, his fear of David increased and settled into a hatred. Saul now hated David. Okay, going back to our lesson, we're at the intercession. Verses 4 and 5. Jonathan brought up David with his father, speaking well of him. "Please," he said to his father, "don't attack David. He hasn't wronged you, has he? And just look at all the good he's done. He's put his life on the line when he killed the Philistine. What a great victory God gave to Israel that day. You were there, you saw it, you were on your feet applauding along with everyone else. So why would you even think of sinning against an innocent person, killing David for no reason whatsoever?" Here Jonathan is beginning to intercede for David to protect him. Jonathan is in an effort to remind the king, his father, that he had a duty to God not to do wrong against others, especially those who are innocent. Saul did not have moral authority to have David killed, and if he did, that would go against God's law about killing an innocent person, which the king was meant to obey those laws. Jonathan reminds his father that David had done nothing to bring harm to Saul and that David was committed to supporting the king as the anointed of the Lord. Jonathan reminded his father Saul all that good that David had done. He told him all, remember this and remember this. He reiterated all the things he had done. Jonathan then ends with, why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? This question made it clear to Saul, even though he is the king, he would become guilty and deserving of death, according to Deuteronomy 19:13. And Deuteronomy 19:13 in the CEV says, Israel, for the good of the whole country, you must not kill anyone. You must kill anyone who murders an innocent person. Never show mercy to a murderer. So if you kill someone that doesn't deserve it, according to the old law, you had to be killed yourself. That kind of goes back to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that old law. 3, the aftermath. Verses 6 and 7. Saul listened to Jonathan and said, you're right. As God lives, David lives. He will not be killed. Jonathan sent for David and reported to him everything that was said. Then he brought David back to Saul, and everything was as it was before. Jonathan's defense of David seems to have worked. Jonathan's intervention thus culminated in King Saul taking an oath that David would not be put to death. Although Saul had a history of rebellion against the Lord, in this case he honored God by heeding the wise counsel of his son Jonathan and choosing not to sin against David or God. Deuteronomy 23, verses 21 through 23 declares that vows must be kept, while Ecclesiastes 5, verses 4 through 6 tells us breaking a vow angers the Lord, and he made this vow. By swearing that David would live, Saul bound himself to do what was in his power to protect David. The result of Jonathan's efforts was that David resumed his place in Saul's court as he was before. And in the conclusion, there are 3 characters in our story today that illustrate positions people will find themselves in this day and age. Number 1, Saul was a person in power who was abusing his position in doing wrong toward one another. And we see that all the time now. We hear it on the news where people in charge of these big companies take advantage of those underneath them. Number 2, David was of lower status, the innocent victim of the wrath that Saul had. And 3, Jonathan was the one who risked sharing that wrath by standing up for the victim. He cared for both the wrongdoer and the innocent victim as he sought to end the conflict by reconciling them. He took it on himself, regardless of the risk it meant to himself. He could have been killed, thrown out of the kingdom, whatever. He took it on himself to reconcile the two together and to protect his friend. At some times in our life, we may find ourselves in one of these 3 roles. Periodically, someone who cares for both the wrongdoer and the victim may be in a position to reconcile those in conflict. And I've got a question. In what situations should estranged parties be left to work out reconciliation on their own rather than allow a mediator to intervene? Sometimes you'll see people that will say, just let them fight it out, I'll just back out. But when do you think would be a good time that we should intervene? Is there ever a good time? And what situation do you think we should intervene when people are fighting back and forth?
I think balance. So it's good if you can bring the family back together. So I would say your family. I mean, even then, you still have to know when they're back home.
What if you went to intervene and mediate for somebody and they said, if you get involved in this, say it's at an office, if you get involved in this, you'll be fired. Then what do?
If it's at my job?
Makes it a little tougher for us.
Well, yeah. I guess I would just have to pray that they would ask me. Ask me what was my opinion. I mean, I had that happen to me. Believe it or not, I work at a beauty salon. This is so stupid. I worked at a beauty salon, and this lady came in, got her hair done, and I thought it was really nice, but the manager of the beauty salon thought it was terrible. And he told me that if I said that it didn't look, that it looked bad, I mean, if I said that it looked good, that he would fire me. He said, yeah, and he did. He told me to just leave because it was not a good haircut, it was not a good, but then he came back and apologized to me and rehired me back. But that was the
But that's a
most
perfect example to go along
stupid
with this.
thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a situation of a person's personal anger and wrath, and they've taken it out on somebody that didn't deserve it. Anybody else?
I'm not quite sure what the question was.
If
Intervention.
intervention, there's two parties. There's someone who's in power and someone who's not in power, and the one not in power is the victim, and the one in power is taking advantage of the situation and overpowering the other one and not treating them right. Intervening. Would you intervene? What if it risked your job? What if it risks going to jail? Would you intervene the way Jonathan intervened for David?
Think about that.
Yeah.
That's a difficult question because it depends on the situation.
And-
Is it of the Lord or is it, a question?
Very good, yeah.
As
We ask the Lord to
integrity. How are we supposed to get involved? Sometimes we're not supposed to get involved because it needs to be worked out by itself.
Yes, that's true. So we should pray about it. We should
Yes,
talk to God and see what He thinks about it. Yes.
I've had that same situation happen at work with Mother Joanne, and but it was quite different. I was a manager at a retail store, but I was a security manager, so that's kind of all on its own. And then they have the executives, like 3-tier executives, like the store manager and the 2 assistants. And a lot of the times when it would be nighttime, of course the store manager wouldn't close. So like the supervisors would come to me and they'd be like, oh, this person is being rude and I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, do what Gabe would tell you to do. He's like, oh, but he would just tell them to do anything. I'm pretty sure that these guys are lying. They come in here all the time. They return stuff from, other stores and just, and they just want to take advantage of the situation. Well, I knew that Gabe had came to me prior to that, told me, I don't want you to get involved in store matters. Well, I was a manager, right? So it was kind of having that in the back of my head, but then again, having yet them call me. And the question says, refers to 2 Corinthians 5:18-20, where it says that God has made us, as He's a reconciliation for us, He made us reconcile. He made us to reconcile with others. So, we really have to, at that point, I had to kind of like weigh my options. And, I just said, God, let me handle this situation. They need my help and they need my help. So let me handle this situation. So then when I know the customer's going to complain to Gabe because that's what they do, they say, well, I know the store manager, I'll just call him tomorrow. So I said, so let me handle this situation in a way that won't have them call the store manager tomorrow and complain. So then I would come in and able to kind of just reconcile both sides. I'm a big guy and I don't walk around like I want to beat up people, but when they see me walk up to the situation, then everybody kind of calms down, and it's like for our employee, they would breathe a sigh of relief. For the customer, they would kind of calm down. Okay, well, I see what you're saying. Well, I was just telling her to just go ahead and do it, but what you're saying makes sense. So sometimes we just really have to ask God to just bless us and going in that situation, and remember that He called us to reconcile to one another because He reconciled to us.
Good. That's a very good point. And that's, if we have integrity, if we walk in integrity the way the Lord wants us to do, we're going to be listened to more too.
That's right.
Now, occasionally you'll get somebody that won't listen to you, but you have to do what's right in your own heart where God has placed in you too. And I think if we walk as people of integrity, then we will be listened to when it comes to that volatile situation.
Like you said, prayer is the most important thing.
Yes.
Ask God to everything, ask God to direct our paths. We can't, unless He reveals Himself, there's really not much we can do other than pray.
See, and I have a habit in situations, and I've done this before, when you're messing with a senior citizen, when you're messing with an animal, when you're messing with a child, I come in the group and I will go to bat for that person. And I've told the story before, I was in a store once and there was an older woman in a wheelchair and the son was pushing her and he stopped and just started berating her and telling her how stupid she was, and I just jumped in. I didn't think about it, I didn't stop to pray to God, but I went to bat for her and I basically told the guy, back off or I'm going to call the police and I'll call Adult Protective Services and I will have her take it. And she grabbed my hand and just like leaned on me. She was terrified of this guy. There's some times in our life when we step in, but that could have turned out very bad too, because in this day and age, he could have pulled out a gun and shot me or anything. You just never know what people are going to do. But I think with the integrity, because I wasn't some crazy person, I didn't come on real strong, I just was very firm in what I said, he backed off. And he said, I'm leaving, and he went out of the store. As well as my husband, who said, I want no part of this.
Like for me, in my situation, the thing about it was when that happened, I wasn't in the church, I was in the world, but my manager was in the church.
Ah, now that's a good example of where, as people in church, we need to have that integrity. When
Right.
we behave like that, and then you have someone who's not in the church, who's handling it better than you are, that should be a wake-up call for you to say, okay, what am I doing? Lord, convict my spirit, keep me in line, and bring me to the point where I need to be.
I think that's why he came back and apologized, because to me, he was telling me, I felt like he was telling me I didn't have an opinion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, just questions?
Very good.
This one was a pretty cut and dry thing where the story of Jonathan and his love for David and all that. Let me just see one of the, we talked about that. Let me see. Were you to attempt to mediate a reconciliation, what tactics would you consider to be off limits? That's a good question.
It depends on the situation. Like I said, I've had situations where I've had to get back up, and I've had situations where I had to shut my mouth.
Yep.
Sometimes, when you're going into a situation, and you're trying to mediate between two sides, sometimes your presence is just enough.
Yes, yes.
And if you pray before that, God will put that spirit upon you, that spirit of peace, and to when you walk into that situation, that things will just start to calm down. If you ever had a situation where somebody say, every time you come around, you just have a calming effect around you, right? Well, that's the Holy Spirit. That's the Holy Spirit.
Exactly.
That's the Holy Spirit. You pray like I used to pray every day. Lord, in the name of Jesus, I just want to go to work and do the best job I can do. Please just let me, just let your spirit precede me and just let me just have a common effect on myself and the people around me. Because in retail, especially during the holidays, it's so hectic as a security manager, you know, you're pulled in like several different directions, and everybody thinks everybody is stealing, and then there's the people that are stealing, and then there's the associates that are stealing. So it's like
But
you're
you'll
just
see
pulling in.
people come in too and say, I witnessed that and this is what I saw, and sometimes that helps
Yes,
to
yes,
intercede
right.
that way. When we think about this question too, were you to attempt to mediate a reconciliation or even to calm a situation down, what tactics are off limits? Think about what's going on today in the news. With the violence, with the police.
Please,
Do we go into a situation angry and loud and grabbing people and throwing them around? What does that do? That just sets the situation off. We need to be calm, and that's where the Holy Spirit in us comes through, where we need to stay calm and really think about how we're handling it. Okay, that's all I have for today, unless you guys have a question. Everybody's quiet, so, all right. Thank you for attending. Oh, I've got one that I purchased some of them.